Check. Check. Meeting of January 26, 2021. Madam Secretary, will you please provide the roll call?
When your name is called, please answer with here or present. Member Frost?
Here.
Member Killebrew?
Here.
Vice Chair Federico?
Here.
Chair Orlando? Chair Mitchell?
Here. I'm still getting used to it.
For the record, all members of the Financial Review Committee are present.
We'll move on to the public comments portion of the meeting. There will be a 3-minute time limit per person and an overall time limit of 15 minutes for this public comments portion of the agenda. All comments are to be directed to the Financial Review Committee and shall not consist of any personal attacks. Members of the public are expected to maintain a professional and courteous decorum during these comments. State and law prohibits the Financial Review Committee from taking action on a specific item unless it appears on the agenda. Madam Secretary, are there any public comments?
We have no public comments at this time.
Great. We will move forward to new business. The item 1, approval for the minutes of the October 27th, 2020 Financial Review Committee meeting. Can I call for a motion?
I will move the meeting minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Great. On to the next item, the quarterly financial report ending December 31st, 2020. Staff reports.
I will provide the staff report on this one. Really quick, the first 6 months of the current fiscal year, FY 2021, ended December 31st. Summary is before you, and financial reports are attached. No surprise to anybody, our revenues are down year over year. Most of that is related to the reduction in our hospitality industry taxes, or TOT, which is about $3 million, but some of it was made up by better than or year-over-year growth in property taxes, and sales taxes a little bit anomalous in that some of the third and fourth quarter taxes from last year that were deferred by governor action, we did get some of that this year. So we did do better year over year, and then our building counter, planning, building, and engineering activity is up year over year. On the expenditure side, the ledger shows a $1.8 million lower in expenditures. Most of that has to do with prior year transfers to our capital fund, particularly in regards to the council's decision a year ago to transfer surplus general fund revenues to the capital projects fund for future capital improvement projects, and also some for a Doheny Village beautification account. The budget and ending fund balance for this year is shown. This was amended. The adopted budget was amended back in September during our rollover report. I want to go to the second table on that first page that shows the budgeted ending fund balance. Details by reserves, and there is a typo on here. The council did approve transferring $2.1 million from the economic stability reserve to the unassigned fund balance, and it didn't get picked up on this table. This table is actually the adopted budget, so that will be amended prior to getting on next week's council agenda. The bottom line is the same. The council just approved moving money from the economic stability reserve to the unassigned fund balance, again, back in September. And again, this is budgeted. I don't know that I really need to get into a lot of detail on the revenue. Member Frost and Member Federico both heard a detailed presentation last week that is actually part of the agenda item number 3, and I had a chance to speak with Chair Mitchell and go over in details over that same presentation from last week. It's no surprise to anybody that our hospitality industry revenues are down, given the impacts of COVID and the state's orders. Also, our sales tax has followed suit to some extent, so we are down and expect to be down through the balance of the year on sales and use taxes. At this point in time, kind of a bottom line, and I say that in my detailed presentation, which is agenda item number 3, we are on target to do better than our amended budget. Revenues are pretty close, but I still expect them to come in over our amended revenue budget. Expenditures at this point in time and absent anything anomalous happening that we have to spend a lot of money on, I do expect probably to come in this fiscal year. And it's still early, but likely about $1 million under our amended budget. So I am expecting to have budgetary savings this year that will go toward helping to replenish some of the economic stability reserve by the end of this fiscal year. That I'll talk about next fiscal year as we move forward. That pretty much concludes my report. There's nothing that everybody doesn't understand as far as what's going on with our operations, revenues, and expenditures. We're doing everything we can to keep some positions vacant and get personnel savings. The Sheriff's Department has had regards to promotions and or folks out hurt and or folks out with COVID, which requires us to shift around, bring in staff from other parts of their department on overtime. Overtime is cheaper than straight time because there's no benefit on the overtime, but also we've had to repurpose, redeploy some of our staff typically not assigned, some of our sworn staff typically not assigned to patrol. Our CSU unit, our community services unit in particular, they've been backfilling on patrol, so we're not having to pay for a patrol position we already had in our contract to pay for the CSU position. So we're seeing some savings there as well. But the bulk of the savings that I'm projecting at this point in time is from the sheriff's contract. And with that, again, attached are revenues and expenditure reports for the first 6 months of the year and a variety of other balance sheet reports from all of our other funds. And I'm available to answer any questions.
Does the committee have any discussion? I know you guys have gone through this in length, so.
Madam Chair, I actually do have a quick question, if that's all right. Just a couple brief ones, sort of on the analysis of some of this in hindsight. So TOT was down by 40%-ish, 3.2 million short, and it came in at 3.9, so about 40%. And sales tax was
that we didn't get from closing the FY20 books or to defer sales tax.
Do we know how much more we're owed on the sales tax?
I've got a report.
Yeah, okay.
And it's not as easy to pick through. We've got a consultant that scrubs through all the data, and there is a number. We're going to lose some of it because some of the businesses went under. They used the taxes they collected and didn't pay for cash flow, and if they don't make it, then there's nobody to go after for the old tax bills unless there's assets in a bankruptcy or something. So thankfully, we fared fairly well in that regard, I think.
there's probably, I guess, all that answers my question. That there's really not enough information here for us to determine whether people are shopping local, and if you know we're not so much relying on the hotel sales tax generation, food and beverage in general, or it's just interesting. I don't think there's actionable information out of this, except maybe to know that we are creating some good, better habits amongst our residents. I don't have the information.
I could look specifically down at a restaurant level, for instance, which would be where most of our local increase would come from. I can do that. I have not done that, and whether or not that sticks post-pandemic, I'm hoping it will. I think some people have found some favorite places in town, and the other thing is there are some restaurants, and again, I haven't looked at this, so it's just observational, that I think might even be doing better than pre-pandemic. So a couple of them, not many, and it's spotty. When they might have a record month. I know I've talked to a couple of restaurateurs. They've had a record month here and there, but overall they're all struggling, not having particularly indoor dining, and for probably a good 75 days over the last 9 months where they didn't even have outside dining. So
I'll defer to the rest, everyone else here. I don't know if it's worth putting too much time into, just because it's not much we can do with it. But maybe
I do have
some down the road.
we get a quarterly report that we can share publicly, because detailed sales tax information is, we have to hold it in confidence, given the proprietary nature of it. But the sales tax reports, we will get a copy of the most recent one. There's about I'll say a 4-month lag from the end of a reporting period to the time we end up getting data and the reports. But we'll get you the last quarterly report that we have from HDL, and we'll scan it and email it off to the committee and make it part of the record.
It might help inform the strategic plan update that we're doing and some other things.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, I thought, so what we looked at the council last week, it was easier for me to put together our total reserves. So our general fund reserves 14.3. How do I go back and how do I look at the balance sheet of, I guess it'd be Fund 11 to determine our total reserves? And those total reserves are what, like 18, 17 at this time?
Total reserves that aren't restricted. Yeah, there is a slide I have in agenda item number 3 that lists all those other accounts. I'm gonna say it's slide 11 or 13. I'm sorry, it's agenda item 4 is the one I keep referring to. And it is slide 12 in there, and it lists out all the other accounts that we have that aren't restricted by outside sources. They might be designated by the city council, but that could change if needed. Where outside monies like gas tax, Measure M, you have to spend it on its intended purpose. No, it's slide 12. It's almost all the way in the back of section 4.
No, go.
Just roughly, I've always wondered this. So if we go to this like summarized balance sheet for Fund 11, we've got $8 million in there. Assuming we have Matt with ongoing projects, I'm sorry, it'd be page 9 of 15. Is that like summarized balance sheet? When you get, I guess, the total unrestricted, is that simply basically you're netting out the projects Matt has started? Is that fair to say? I've always wondered.
The number you see on that slide, not on the balance sheet, shows actual cash minus actual revenues and expenses year to date. It's not a budgetary commitment. It's an actual balance sheet. If you take the expenditure, revenue and expenditure, the P&L sheet for that fund, you'll see the budget commitment and the actuals year to date. So you'll see the budget. It's the budget commitments that I use, that I take out of the actual funds available to get to what's available. So as soon as the council makes a decision to budget a project, I take it out of available fund balance for future budget discussions. If they need more money, then we can go look at those projects where they don't have a contract yet and look at reducing the investment, the budgeted investment in that project. But once a commitment's made for a contract, we lock it down.
All right, great. Yeah, I that's what I thought you did. I just had never actually seen it. I had always sort of backed into it, but that makes sense. And okay, and I'll ask the more reserves questions at the end.
And you'll also see that commitment I've got charts in the budget book itself, and we obviously maintain them monthly. so that we know where we're at any given point in time. So there are fund balance sheets. There's one that's summary that shows all the funds across the top, beginning fund balance, revenues, expenditures, ending fund balance. So the beginning fund balance includes any commitments made in the prior year that we're rolling over. So anytime the council makes a decision on budget, we take it out of available fund balance.
Even if it might not start for a year?
Yeah, if we do a 2-year budget, I'm bound. The council tells me otherwise.
Gotcha. Okay, great.
Okay. Any other discussion on item number 2 for this committee?
Real quick.
Yeah.
That just sparked a question for me.
Sure.
So when we're back on balance sheet, Mike,
Mhm.
just so I better understand this. So on Fund 11, capital improvements, because this is a balance sheet, assets and liabilities, how much money, where is the fund balance undesignated, what we have that isn't committed by the council? Is that the best way to read this?
Yes. We only transfer restricted money in as we spend it.
I gotcha. Okay. So just from a very, simple managerial accounting perspective, I looked at this, we have 4.3 million in that capital investment account, in the capital investment fund, that is not committed by the council. I like using the word committed. I know
Yeah,
it's not an
that's fine.
accounting term, but
It's budgeted.
budgeted for, yeah.
To the community investment reserve, the 4,037,000
Mhm.
is not committed.
It's also not committed, although it's been earmarked. That's why you have it sort of separate.
It's in the equity section. So it's
Right.
the total equity beginning of the year was 9.1 million, but 4 million of it the council designated
Gotcha.
for future community investments.
And all the projects that are already committed to by past council action, basically approving Matt's CIP projects that he brings forward once a year, those are already all accounted for.
They're
already gone. It's not in here. It's not.
This is your cash, the 4.308 million that you have on a balance sheet
Mhm.
that I report out to the world as actual amount. There's $4.3 million that's not designated by the council. If you look at the PowerPoint, so this is an accounting book. Now I have to switch to budget. If you look at that slide 11 or 13, slide 12 in the PowerPoint, that's at the back of section 4 of your binder. That sheet, you will see CIP unassigned fund balance 568,000. You see that? That's the remainder after all the budget commitments that the council's made out of that $4 million that's shown on the actual balance sheet. So
Okay. So because this is a balance sheet,
and that's also projected through that's the low mark, if you will, looking out 7 years at our investments in the capital projects that Matt's got on the table. Our undesignated fund balance projection for the capital projects fund, the low mark is 568,000. If I look at next year, it might say 1.1 million, but then I've got a project in FY23 or 4, and at some point it's going up and down, but the low mark that I say to the council, I have a balanced CIP project for 7 years, even if we spend that 568,000. That's the low mark. So I know there's nuances to this whole thing that aren't like absolutely straightforward. It's what you see in the balance sheet is that snapshot today that has the beginning equity, and revenues and expenses year to date does not show commitments.
okay. So it would be an error for me to look at this
Yes.
and say, oh, we have 4.3 million uncommitted, because some of that is maybe committed.
Some of it,
All but 568,000 is
over the next 7 years of our projections, there's
Over the-
568 that's not
Okay.
identified. If the council changed their mind, doesn't want to do projects, that number goes up.
I got you. From a managerial perspective, there isn't then a place where we could say, okay, how much have we committed and isn't yet contracted that we could maybe pull back?
Yeah, no, I've got that too.
You've got that somewhere. I'm
So
just
if
saying
you
it's
look at
not
our
here.
if you look at our P&L
Mhm.
that shows budget versus actual, we also have an encumbrances or
Gotcha.
contractual commitments, and then you look to the right of that, and it'll say what's left over, what's not committed.
We're not there, and
I know.
and I'm not asking you to do it, but I suspect part of the reason Mr. Frost is asking that question is that's something always in the back of our minds, like, hey, what money could we make different decisions on, and what sort of leeway do we have? But it's while you have all that information, it's not necessarily in the documents that we have right now in front of us. True.
Mhm.
Okay, that's just fine. I just want to make sure we're not drawing the wrong conclusions.
If there's no more discussion, this item is just to receive and discuss, and we'll move on to the next item. No, you're fine.
I didn't see it. There's supposed to be a report in here that shows the revenues and expenditures by project.
I think I saw that in there.
CIP projects. Okay. You keep saying. I'll get it. After the balance sheets. There it is. Okay, so it'll be easier to show you the sheet. So at the top of the sheet says CIP projects budget versus actual. It's after the balance sheets.
Yeah.
So you'll see budget remaining. If you see a year-to-date activity plus encumbrances, so that's our actual checks we've written and any contractual commitments that we've got. Those are all added together. You'll see we, as of 12/31, we had $4,186,000 of expenditures and contractual commitments. So we have $4,189,000 that's not spent or committed at that point. And you'll usually see the biggest numbers there are going to be our roadway projects, residential or arterial streets, that the public works staff is working on designing that project. The design is part of the budget. And then when they actually go out to come to council and go out to actually let the contract, that's when we'll do the encumbrance and commit it. But when I'm looking at the bottom line, how much is unassigned and available for the council to talk about on any given day, it assumes that all the things the council has budgeted, we've set aside, and we don't tell you you have more money to spend. This is a sheet you can look at, Member Frost, and say, oh, maybe, let me look for one here. Water quality diversion repairs and maintenance. We have $50,000 budget. We haven't spent any money yet. It's project 1325, and we've got no contractual commitments. Can we spend that? I've got an answer that would be no, but I mean, you wouldn't want to, but because Matt's already working on upgrading some valves and some storm drain units. So that's how you would look at this. But if you make the assumption that I'm taking out everything the council's told me they want to do, and then at some point, if push comes to shove and you're looking for money, we would have these discussions. What do you not want to do if you need money for something else?
Sorry, Madam
No,
Chair,
this was really helpful.
I have one more real
Yeah,
quick one
go.
because I think I now understand. Again, back to because this is a balance sheet, and back on the balance sheet section of Fund 11, it adds up to about $8.4 million, whatever. But if we go to the two funds, 112580 and 119920, the 9920 is basically everything here that in the CIP projects, budget versus actual, that Matt's working with. Is that right? And then the 4 million is the reserve that the council created to have a capital improvement project reserve.
If the council decided to pick a new project that's not budgeted and they want to spend some of the community investment reserve on it, the actions I would bring to council would be release the reserves into the undesignated, move them, and then give me the budget authority to actually go out and spend
To
it.
actually put them over here and start spending it. Thank you.
Okay, well, if there's no more discussion, then we'll move on to the next item, the annual review of the investment policy. Staff report, please.
So it's pretty quick. Required under government code for a city council to approve statement of safekeeping and investment of public policy, investment policy. Action document A is that document. Our council asks that the financial review committee take a look at any changes to the policy, but also it's a step, even if there are no changes, that the financial review committee consider it and make a recommendation to city council. We have in our annual audit contract, our auditors review our investment policy to make sure it's consistent with current government code, state law. And in this case, the auditors review found no exceptions, and they made no suggestions for policy revisions. There is the information here that changes, like the name of the city treasurer is the city manager now. And the year is now 2021. So we made some clerical changes, but otherwise the entirety of the investment policy is the same as was adopted last year. That concludes my report.
Does the committee have any discussion on this? No. I'd like to call for a motion.
Second.
All in favor? I don't think we have
I'm gonna
first.
I'm gonna make a goofy point of order for
Yeah.
the sake of doing it. Did you call for a motion or make the motion to move the item?
I make the motion to move the item.
Okay, and it's seconded? Then I think we're good.
Perfect. I know that stuff gets confusing.
Yes, aye.
Aye.
Okay, on to the next item. Fiscal year 2022-23 budget process and discussion for the draft of the long-term financial plan. The recommended action for this is for the Financial Review Committee to receive and discuss the information. So tonight, staff report, please.
And I will keep this brief. The member Frost and member Federico, like I mentioned, sat through this last Tuesday night at the council meeting. And Chair Mitchell, I had a chance to speak with you in depth about it. So I will keep my report short. Our financial policies require that we update our long-term, our relatively new financial policies require that we update our long-term financial plan annually. We actually did the first one back in 2015. And so we've drafted it. It goes into quite a bit of detail on our largest revenues and expenditures historically and projections. It also talks about impacts on our fund balance and our reserves. There are two sections that I have left unfinished at this point in time, as we're just starting to roll into our budget process, and particularly given what's going on with COVID and our the economy and our hospitality industry in particular. This was honestly getting drafted the week between Christmas and New Year's. We had just 3 weeks prior gotten the latest stay-at-home order from the governor, and everybody was adjusting to figuring that out and not knowing what the future looked like. But thankfully yesterday, that was lifted to we're back to what we were before, I think, December 3rd. So we did field a lot of calls today from our hospitality industry partners asking what are they allowed to do. So I've left the economic forecast and the closing observation sections blank at this point in time. They're under construction. They will be completed in the coming months as we hope to get more clarity on what our near, mid, and long-term financial projections look like. And then I'm going to pretty much just go to the PowerPoint, but there's, I think, 45 pages of details and history here. You can read it at your leisure and ask me questions now or later. It's a bit of effort to put it together, but it's actually a useful document and kind of gives us a historical account of what's been happening with our major revenues and expenditures, and a lot of the assumptions that go into our projections. I did cover the PowerPoint in detail, as I said, with all of you. It's required that we do the long-term financial plan. The council decided last Tuesday night also to take a separate effort looking at updating our strategic plan. So we'll be endeavoring to do that in the coming months to half a year. I do not have any recommendations in regards to any changes to our financial policies. They have worked incredibly well this past 9 months with the impact of COVID hitting us, and they, in particular, the Economic Stability Reserve, and forcing us to balance not only this year, next year, but going out 7 years. The financial policies, I think, are serving us well, and I do not have any recommended changes to it. I list in here the actual and projected economic hit from COVID-19 on particularly our two largest revenues that are impacted by the hit to our hospitality industry and transient occupancy tax and sales tax. I talk about the financial relief we received to date. Just to be clear, there's no projected further relief in any of my projections if money does show up from the federal, state, or other agencies in regards to our dealing with the pandemic, then it'll be good news. But otherwise, I'm make no assumptions that we will get any. I talk in detail about, again, our hit TOT and our other major revenues and how they're performing. I talk about our expenditures and go into some quite a bit of detail on the assumptions I'm using for our major expenditures, including our sheriff's contract and projections, personnel costs, and talk about unfunded liability for our pension program, and then a couple of other things. I talk about the risks that we're always facing in regards to TOT, but in particular, whether or not the COVID-19 economic impacts on tourism and our hospitality industry, if they go any deeper, or how long they're going to last, and how long it takes to recover. I've made quite a bit of assumptions in here that I'm comfortable with today. I talk about short-term rentals and the fact that our community is talking about how best to move forward with short-term rentals. It's a risk on our revenues. I talk about new hotel projects. I don't have any new hotels in our next 2-year proposed budget. If we get hotels, it'll be beyond the budget that will be before the council. We've already talked about all the other designated accounts. I show what I'm looking at as far as recommendations to the council for use of continued use of the Economic Stability Reserve next year and the following year to get us through recovery. General comment for me is that over the long haul through fiscal year 27, it looks like our revenues are in line with our expenditures. The caveat I put on there is beyond this next 2-year budget, when I get out to FY 25, 6, and 7, there are some assumptions for 2 of the 5 hotel projects that are in the planning stages right now for them to phase in and then be fully operational. If those start getting delayed beyond where I've got them in our projections, and when I go back 2 years and I was including one of the hotels in this upcoming 2-year cycle. I've pushed it back now 2 more years. It is what it is, but there's a risk there. The very last page of the slide, focus on that for a minute. If there are any items that this financial review committee wants staff to bring up at the council meeting next week, let's have that discussion and make a recommendation, and I will add it as part of the discussion for the second quarter quarterly report, and or if there's any budget priorities. And then there's opportunities to agendize on the council calendar further discussions in regards to the upcoming budget process. We will have we call it our mid-year report, but by, in about 3 weeks, we'll be sitting down and doing another projection through the end of the year, which we're doing pretty much weekly, but we'll make a hard call on whether or not we think there needs to be any revenue or major revenue or expenditure adjustments. At this point in time, I don't see any. That's the mid-year financial report on the 2nd of March. I plan on doing another update, kind of getting closer to finalizing this long-term financial plan by the middle of March, taking the council's temperature on whether or not they think we're still headed in the right direction as far as how I'm looking at numbers. And then early to mid-April, we will produce the next 2-year proposed budget book. We will do briefings with council members and FRC members. We have our first budget workshop on the 20th of April. That next week, we'll have our next quarterly financial review committee meeting. The major topic in that would be the proposed budget. And then we've got slated 2 additional budget workshops at the council in May. And then on our calendar, the first chance to actually adopt a budget would be June 1st, where we'll hold a formally noticed hearing for the budget, which is also the point where the council would adopt any changes they want with the strategic plan and also finalize the long-term financial plan. So with that, I'm available for any questions.
Committee, do you have any questions or discussion?
Yeah, real quick, Mike. So this is my chance to go back to my original question since we got all the way back here. Only because I look at sort of our quarterly report and we have the table of our reserves, but really the reserves as they apply to the general fund. And then I go back to the PowerPoint, which we looked at last week, and I add them all up, and I do get to 17, roughly, because we got 8.5 in the general fund plus the unfunded pension liabilities. Is it correct that I landed about 18 overall unrestricted? Is that fair to say? I'm on a combination of page 12, slide 12 and 13 of the PowerPoint. And so that, by the way, that's what I was really looking at last week. And I probably should have made sure I was looking at it correctly. Right, page 13 is our general fund reserves, the economic stability extreme event unassigned, which also show up in our quarterly on the very beginning. But then we also have general plan update, community investment account, Doheny Village, CIP unassigned. Right, it's fair to say that if we have a catastrophe, right, we have all that available.
We have all that available and insurance.
Okay. Just for when I, walk around and talk to people and summarize, even with the pandemic, we roughly have reserves of 18 million, which is, still, roughly 40% of our budget for 21. If that's right. Because we have about a $40 million budget. And just rough figures.
Yes.
Okay.
and we have about 19 million.
19 million. Got it.
Add all those up. And not seen here also in some of our restricted accounts, there would be the ability to take them down to zero as in the balances we're carrying those, and lighten the general fund's contribution to those restricted activities. So I don't ever want to even have to have that discussion. But there are dials to turn after we talk about ratcheting back, expenditures and different efforts, and then starting to talk about what other money do we have. We're in pretty good shape. When you add in the ability for us to dial back different programs and expenditures, we're probably north of 60%. I'll call it reserves, when you add up all those other funds compared to our annual budget.
I think that's great. I mean, I like how the previous FRC did sort of break out our reserves, but it's also nice to add them all up for a quick conversation. And so, yeah, I mean, that's all. One thing, if you'd want, it's not the end of the world, just on our quarterly reviews. I don't know if you'd add a row that said other reserves, just so we get a total reserve on that front page.
What I will do is we've got a page in the budget book that I can actually update and just show them all across the bottom, where it's got the budgeted ending fund balance, and then I'll break it down into the reserves, the details of that ending fund balance for each of the funds.
Okay.
That's not hard to do.
Nice. No, thank you. And again, I mean, it's just with the pandemic and the ability to at least continue to fund the required CIP stuff. I mean, I would just say, good job.
Yeah, definitely. I just have a quick question on slide 6. What formula did you use to determine the TOT calculations?
For FY20, that
Mhm.
actually happened. And that's the difference between our original budget and what we actually collected, the $2,667,000 that we
What
lost.
was our estimate on that one? Do we remember?
Yeah, I have the numbers.
I'm curious.
I think they're actually they're in the long-term financial plan.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Page 5.
So our original budget for TOT, I don't have it on here, Jamie. Our original budget for TOT was, give me a second, please. For FY20 was 12.75 million.
And then we adjusted for COVID, and what
We
was
adjusted for COVID, and then we actually beat that number.
we beat that number?
Yeah.
Okay. And then for FY21 and 22, how did you?
FY21, our original budget was 12.8.
Wow.
And the delta's that loss you see there.
Yeah.
FY22 was a projection from 2 years ago on where we thought we were going to be in FY22. And I've updated those projections to take into account that our hospitality industry will not fully rebound next year. It won't rebound all the way next year.
Okay.
And I've got, like I said, we've got models going back 20 years that are actually broken down by month, so we can track it
No, that's
monthly by hotel property. And I mean, the forecast, it's not magic, because the hoteliers don't tell us what their bookings are, even though they know some of them for next May. So we're constantly challenging them to get us updates, and I'll get numbers that are 30 days. Hey, the next 30 days, it looks like our occupancy is going to be this. I'll get it. Hey, we're killing it this month. We're up at 73%. And when I say, what does it look like next year? Um, typically haven't gotten a lot of information. So it's just, how's business going? How are your future bookings? Great, not so good. You know, it's not really precise. But
Okay.
you're asked to do the impossible when you're trying to bet how much
Right.
somebody else is going to do in business and how much you're going to make from it, because you have no control over it.
Okay. Any other discussion from the committee?
Madam Chair, I have a couple questions.
Yep.
In the draft plan, Mike, pages 5 and 6. So from a very high level financial review perspective, FY 2025 is the 1 year where right now we're projecting total revenues to projecting expenses to outpace revenues. Obviously, we'll make some things work to fix that. The big anomaly I see in 2025 is that $4.9 million transfer out, the last line. Could you just explain what that is?
That's timing commitments for public works projects. So in the staff report from last Tuesday night, we had the projections for the next 7 years on what capital projects would hit in a given year. There's a big project in that year. I'm drawing a blank on what it is, but we're funding to meet that schedule. It's getting more consistent as we're rolling into our infrastructure policy the last couple of years on getting our particular streets onto a certain schedule. The big hit, now it comes to mind, there's a couple of storm drain projects coming up that we've got money in the next two-year proposed budget for design work and updating our storm drain master plan. And we've actually got some money slotted in actually FY 24 and 25 to actually do some of those major projects, and storm drain projects aren't cheap. So those will be the anomalies in there.
So I guess my question for this group is, do we believe, looking at this long-term financial plan, that our overall strategies are sustainable? In other words, can we continue to maintain our roads and buildings and all our capital stuff at the rate we are? Can we afford to maintain our public safety levels and police services levels at the levels that we do? In my mind, it looks like we absolutely can continue, but we're gonna adopt this, and then the city council's the city staff are gonna work on updating the strategic plan. So I think if we felt like we needed to make any changes, or that there were any course corrections that needed to be made from a financial policy, we ought to make those recommendations to the council now. I'm not saying that we need to. I'm perfectly comfortable with this. I like being able to explain that anomaly in the transfer out. I know you mentioned it with the CIP stuff, but that will be lost in a lot of conversations with people. And quite frankly, we really could, except for timing, that gets smoothed out, and it's just something that we sort of have to do. It's not some sort of terrible financial planning that 2025 happens to have that anomaly. And again, for a separate, you talked about this other places lots of times, but the unfunded pension liability, that's one that's mentioned in here. We don't talk about using the unfunded, the 115 trust to smooth that out, but that's something that grows every year unless we do something about it. Right? Because there's interest on it.
There would be interest on it if we invested it in a 115 trust.
I actually mean the other way around. The unfunded liability,
Yes,
forget the 115 trust. It grows every year because they charge us interest on what we owe, right?
Yes.
This was the one that was refinanced like a couple months, or
Now, this is the one where the council set aside $5 million to look into doing a Section 115 trust. I don't want to get too complicated, but even when the 115 trust is there, there's still interest accruing on the unfunded liability because it's in a separate account.
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. There is always interest accruing on that debt.
Yes.
That we're paying. or being charged interest on that debt. I think this long-term financial plan doesn't go out far enough to ever really address the full liability, right?
Pre-pandemic, this plan would have taken into account, the idea was invest in the 115 trust for about 5 or 6 years. And had we done it last year, which we were gearing up to do, literally within a month or two of when COVID hit, we would have been looking at FY 26 and 27 and actually utilizing some of the corpus of the Section 115 trust in addition, and the interest it had earned for 5 years to start helping to pay the unfunded liability annual contribution, that if we don't do anything, it gets amortized and we would be paying it off anyway by 2044, because we are paying a kicker on our annual pension payment. The Section 115 trust would allow us to flatten the amount that would grow to, so that it's a more consistent number. And I drawn it off the top of my head, I think we were looking at having capping it at $700,000 a year, and anything above that, we'd be using that $5 million plus the interest it earned from its investments to help carry the top of that curve. So I'm still looking at that. It'll be out at the end of this cycle here, the FY 27, if not in the next updated long-term financial plan, but it's definitely still there.
It's in my mind, one of the big impacts of COVID that we'll see down the road is that we got lucky, quite frankly, that we hadn't yet invested that 115 trust, and we were able to have some flexibility and use it to continue to get by now. But the flip side of that coin is we have not yet invested that money. It's not earning any interest. And in fact, that fund has been reduced a little bit, bumped by 20%, right?
So in the long-term financial plan, I've actually got in FY 25 carving out $1 million to put the $1 million back in that we borrowed last year. And I believe in FY 26, I have another $500,000 in my projection. So the thought process is totally in line with what the council and FRCs have been saying, which is we need to address that issue. We're not having it invested right now. It's losing interest, if you will, even though the city's still getting it. So I was trying to make that up in my projections as if we were able to do it last year. So it's still there. It's still top of mind.
As long as Mike is still here, and as long as these policies still live, I'm confident we'll address this someday. But this long-term financial plan should have, if not for COVID, would have shown us, if you go to page 37, would have shown us making some payments out of our 115 trust towards that unfunded liability, and we would have been chopping that off. You notice how that unfunded liability cost grows every year on page 41 or 37, depending on how you're looking at it. Or there's a number, it's got a chart in the upper left there. See how that unfunded liability grows every year? We were going to have a nice fund that we would start pulling interest off of and using the interest out of that fund, not even the principal, just the interest, really to start paying that off. But we haven't done that yet. The money, $4 million to the $5 million, is still set aside. But something we need to watch is to make sure that the council doesn't, if the council makes the budgetary decisions to spend more of that we come up with a plan to pay it back down the road. Like I said, as long as we have Mike, we know we're safe. But we have to keep an eye on that and know that flood is still coming of having to make those unfunded liability payments. So, other than that, Mike, thanks. Great job on this. I think it's great. I don't think we need to make any recommendations to the council on big, broad deviations from the way the city's been doing business. But I think if anyone does here, I think we should voice those concerns now and let them know before we kick off the strategic plan review.
I just have a question on two of the line items. The first line item on the budget, or let's see here, where is it? City attorney, what happened? Why did it drop down so low on, I'm on page 9. Sorry. Page 5 also. 5 and 9, whatever you want.
It's so this past year, the prior administration wanted to allocate city attorney costs out to all the operating departments that have the issue area that the attorney was working on.
Gotcha.
So you still look at the attorney's budget and actual in the city attorney department, but then you'll have a negative number for the amount allocated out, and then you'll see every department will have an allocated city attorney budget and actual. It's a lot of work, and I'm arguing that it didn't provide any additional management tools. That all the same, I think the intent was there would be more management tools, and a department's going to be managing their attorney budget. But the reality is the attorney is staff. You won't see that allocation anywhere else in any other books of any other governments. The reality is the city attorney is a staff member that works for the city council and assist city staff where needed. We still do we still do get our billings are allocable to departments. We still have each of the departments review all the charges for the matters that they deal with, but the accounting for it, wasn't providing anything. In fact, it made it look like the attorney costs went down to
That's what it looks like. That's why I'm seeing such a big swing in it.
That is
I'm
literally
questioning it.
books and subscriptions
Right.
budget to update our legal books.
Okay. So the numbers are in there. They're just in different buckets.
Yes.
Okay. Because it does look very strange.
Yeah. So you'll see a code enforcement, and if you look at the city council budget, you'll see it balloon up in 20 because we were allocating it. The 21 amended is still
I
allocated,
see.
but when I go forward, I'm back down to
Gotcha.
the base
Okay.
budget. So
All right.
it was an exercise we all went through, and I'm strongly recommending we not continue doing it. It's a lot of work for the accounting staff that really doesn't provide an additional management tool. And I've always looked at accounting as providing management tools.
Mhm.
Anyway.
Okay. That makes sense.
Good
Thank
catch.
you.
Good
Thank you for
catch.
clarifying that. Are you accounting for all the budget cuts that you've made within the staff? Are you going to be increasing staff in the next couple of years? Because, I mean, I see an increase, but I see a pretty gradual increase. So
So a couple things in here. So the amended budget did have savings from vacancies. The
Mhm.
positions were not eliminated. The FY 22 and 23, the next 2-year budgets and out, they assume those positions are filled.
okay.
Okay. Also in FY 22, in any given year, our 364 or 65 year day, when you divide it by 2-week payrolls, every 7 years, you get an extra payroll that
Payroll.
posts to the year. So FY 22 has an extra payroll in it. And then you go back to 23, 4, 5, 6, and 7, they've all got 26 payrolls. But
Okay.
22 is inflated by a one-time cost.
Okay. But you are accounting for filling those positions?
Yes.
Okay. Does this committee have any other comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mike, for the capital improvement stuff, is it fair to say, and you probably have a list of the 7-year projects, is it fair to say these are must-haves and virtually none of them would be beautification? And if we want some beautification stuff, we better figure out other ways to finance it?
The capital program that we brought to council last week as an attachment to this long-term financial plan discussion is the core. There are some one-time things in there. If you talk to the public works director, he will say some of those are beautification as well, but they're core. It's streets, curbs, gutters, sidewalks, medians, storm drains, and associated money, contingency money for just in case something goes wrong that isn't on a big scheduled project. But yeah, it's core. And the nice to have stuff is on the unfunded capital project list that we always have in the budget. And, it's on any given Tuesday night, majority of the council can say, go figure out how much that costs and let's find a way to fund it. But the base 7-year CIP plan doesn't have any huge projects in it that are new.
Mr. Mayor, obviously we want to be fiscally conservative, but gosh, I'd love to think of some different ways, increases in revenue, leveraging development projects, anything to at least get 7 years to me is a long time to go without sort of any beautification stuff, especially ever since I've lived here, it seems like we've been continuously at least doing some small stuff, either in the Lantern District or Doheny Village. And I'm not suggesting with this revenue we do it, but I just perhaps we can talk to we can put our heads together on other ways to sort of increase revenue. That's the one thing I see out of this that I guess is disappointing.
I think there's two facets to the answer on that. One is we do have some funds set aside. The council has not made any decisions on, and Mike said, hey, on any given Tuesday, we could say, hey, find a way to fund that, whatever it is, project. We have two accounts in my mind, the Doheny Village beautification account with about 800,000 in it, Mike, is that right? And then the community investment account, which was our sort of whatever the next beautification or improvement thing is that we want to do outside of capital project, I'm going to use the word maintenance. So we have two funds set up specifically for that. The money is there. The discussion will be over which of the laundry list of beautification projects, which is why we specifically earmarked some Doheny Village. Some of that money will be spent. Where's your PowerPoint presentation, Mike? Oh, yeah. I just want to see how much money is in that one. Community investment account, $4 million. So the money's there. We just need to figure out which projects to put it to. Separate is, like you said, that money that we have set aside is not nearly enough to fund the list of about 18 different projects that people have brought up as possible good ideas. Mike's got it here, and you can look at it in is it the CAFR or the budget? The back of the budget. You want to read them off, Mike?
Page 151 of the adopted budget that we're in the second year of had everything from an aquatic center to medians on Blue Lantern to a dog fun zone in Capistrano Beach to citywide wayfinding signage, landscape medians on Coast Highway in the Doheny area, Del Obispo Street corridor improvements. I believe those would be north of Stonehill. Doheny Village connectivity, Doheny Village improvements, phase 2, not including Doheny Park Road, Doheny Park Road improvements. So it goes on and on. Pines Park restroom, storm drain master plan, underground electrical. I mean, there's a whole laundry list of, I always call it the hopes and dreams. We did a more formal professional sounding title of unfunded projects list. I refer to it as the hopes and dreams list. Part of my thought on all of this is the next big area of discussion, if you will, has been Doheny Village, and it's taken the city a start and a restart to get the Doheny Village planning effort done. That's finally hopefully coming forward here soon. And I think that's going to drive prioritization of some of the investments, if I had to bet. But I guess we'll see, because we don't know what might come out of that. There were some huge ideas for redesigning the road with turnabouts and all these other things. And I think at the end of the day, it's probably not going to be, it's not going to be as much in the way of public improvements as it's going to be improvements to the zoning code that will allow for investment down there. So
Thanks, Mike. The rest of your comment, I think the answer is correct, that it's taken us a long time, many years, the last economic cycle, quite frankly, since 2009, to save up all this money we sort of have in reserves. When did you spend the big chunk in town center plan?
2014, 13, 14, 15.
Okay.
And that was slated to get started when the Great Recession hit, and we sat on that. So it does take time.
Takes a long time for us, the way our current finances are. So, I think the strategic plan is the way to talk about maybe trying to broaden the economy and do work on the revenue side. Here I think we're probably more focused on understanding the revenues and then looking at the expense side and managing that. But I mean, not necessarily. I mean, our direction to the council to say, hey, there's some things we should probably do in town, and we'll never have the money to do it unless we try to find a way to diversify the economy on the revenue side. But
I think you summarized what I was trying to get at. So thank you.
If there's no more comments or discussion on this, we will receive and discuss it and move on to the next item. And if there's any more staff reports.
Quick staff report. The city staff asked the council last week to allow us to open up recruitment for our vacant financial review committee seat. So we will be publishing notices and working to get applications for the city council to consider an additional person for this body.
Okay. Are there any reports from any committee members? If not, then that adjourns the meeting, and our next financial review committee meeting will be April 27th, 2021 at 4 p.m. in City Council chambers.